I remember saying this once, in your incompleteness is your authenticity. You don't have to stay there. We're working on theosis, but in your incompleteness is your authenticity. Get to know yourself in that fashion.
Mm.
And then know that against all conceivable odds, God is still inutterably interested in you. That's my miracle. It's like, how can that fella even gaze in my direction, at this point? But somehow he does.
This is Jonathan Pajot. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
Hello there. Well, this is Martin Shaw, and I'm afraid whatever you had planned for January, scrap it. I am returning to Symbolic World gleefully with one of the great stories of our time, the Epic of Parzival, the story of the Holy Grail itself. Over 5 nights, I will be telling the tale. These will not be dry lectures or PowerPoint presentations. This will be wild, old, philosophical storytelling in its deepest dimensions. It is life-changing stuff, this story. I've written a book about it. I've been studying it for 20 years. I've told it all over the world, but I have not shared it with you. I've not shared it with Symbolic World. So what else would you want to do in the great wintering time but to sit at the feet of this wonderful story and let me be your guide? I'll see you there.
Hello, everyone. I'm here with the legendary Martin Shaw. It's very exciting. There's a lot of wonderful things happening with Martin. He is going to give us a retelling of the Grail story. You can check it out. It's kind of like a class where every single day you can sit in the evening with Martin and listen to him give you a retelling of Parzival, and at the same time give his insight and his analysis. So that's coming. But also, Martin has a new book called Liturgies of the Wild, which I was very fortunate to get a reader's proof. And so, Martin, yeah, it's wonderful to see you be so successful. Thanks for talking to me.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am the longest overnight sensation of all time.
Ah,
Took
I'm really
7 years.
happy though, because I'll be honest with you. When you kind of converted to Christianity and especially becoming Orthodox, uh, of all the people that I knew that for you it was a great risk, like that it was very costly. Like, at least it could have been very costly, and I think it was at the beginning very costly for you. And so I admired you for your integrity and kind of moving in that direction nonetheless. And every time I see you, every time I see you publish a new book and then go speak to these massive venues, I'm thanking God, and I'm like, God, thank you for giving him this in response.
Oh, Jonathan, that's so amazing to hear. I feel on the end of your prayers. That's a beautiful thing. And as we would both, I'm sure, say to anybody watching, pray for us, please. It's come to the end of the year. Most of us feel like a crumpled up, crisp packet, as we'd say over here. And there is some exhaustion. These are you can always say it's troubled times, but it seems especially corrosive at the moment.
Yeah.
So I am thrilled, to be honest, that in the depths of winter, at the time, to be honest, where some of us can slip a little bit into depression or even despair, that we would gather for 5 nights and go deep into the Grail mysteries. I would find it hard to fathom where else I'd want to be honest. So, I'm looking forward to it. And thank you. Liturgies of the Wild. This is my slightly larger version. It's a thick book. Is out in February, and I am just about to announce, you will be hearing it first, that will include a fairly significant American tour. So
Mm.
I'll be in New York, Chicago, various places on the East Coast, then over to Stanford University, up California, and then finally I will be with, I think probably, do we now call him Deacon Seraphim?
Yeah,
Have you
that's what
noticed?
we
Have you
that's what we
noticed
call
how blue his eyes are now getting? The bigger the beard, the bluer the eyes. You know, there's this sort of prophetic energy coming in that I thoroughly salute. So anyway, I'll be with him. I'll be with Deacon Seraphim, our dear Richard, in Texas at an
it.
Orthodox Arts Conference at Valentine's Day weekend in February.
Oh, that's great. It's been wonderful to kind of see how we call it. I mean, the rise of the storytellers, or that people are starting to notice the importance of remembering and of knowing, and not knowing in a superficial sense, but really living in the stories. And so, I mean, I guess that's why we should start. And I should ask you, Martin, what is the Grail?
What? Oh, good Lord. I would be absolutely convinced that you have had many Symbolic World podcasts already on quite what the Grail is. I wrote a book all about this, and it's this book, Snowy Tower, Parzival and the Wet Black Branch of Language. And one of the things I did in that book, which I will not be doing in our course, is I rather swerved the issue. I rather swerved it because actually, by the time there are three really important literary writers when it comes to the story of the Grail. It would begin very much with Chrétien de Troyes, then through to Parzival, through to Wolfram von Eschenbach, and then the version of Arthur that we're most familiar with really comes from Thomas Malory. Morte d'Arthur, and then the Once and Future King, and that kind of thing. Now, what happens is the stories, this is just me thinking, I've never said this out loud before, you get a more daylight version of the Grail mysteries in Malory than you get a moonlight version. You get a more interior version. You get a more mystical version with Wolfram von Eschenbach, which is the version that I'm stewed in. So quite what the Grail is, well, I don't want to give the game away. You've got to come with us on the adventure. I have half a thought about it. You will know that the Grail in later versions gets very much combed out to a point where it absolutely has to be the Holy Grail. And as a Christian of a mystical disposition, I would be in favor of that. And I think it has great resonance. Grail, it also can relate to a plate. It has a sense of something that is absolutely abundant. So if the Grail is in front of you as a large stone or a plate or something that's fallen from heaven, it has an inexhaustible quality to it. Anything you could want to eat at a Grail feast comes in endless supply from the Grail, anything you would want to drink. And this has its roots in early Celtic, probably pagan stories, I would imagine, really pre-Christian. And so a lot of the scholarship that went on in the 20th century about quite what the Grail is, they maneuvered round two or three different positions. One was, this is absolutely a kind of living Christian mythology that all relates back to, the Last Supper, and probably could be argued that Chrétien just sort of imagined a lot of it up, probably being very influenced by the oral tradition and hearing a lot of stories. And then, so in other words, it wouldn't have the backstory of Celtic and Irish myth that most people suppose it has. You will probably know the historian Tom Holland, who wrote Dominion. Tom Holland, kind of slightly controversially, is of the opinion that Chrétien just thought it all up. He was just sort of, a divine download, and he just sort of put it together. However, one of the reasons I wonder if that is the case, and it is only wondering, is one of the stories that Chrétien wrote down was a story called Lancelot. He introduces Lancelot and Gawain and the Holy Grail. He's the guy. This is where it begins in literature, but not necessarily in orality. But Chrétien never finished his story of Lancelot, and it's not necessarily that he died. It's likely that he did not approve of the adultery of Lancelot with Guinevere in the story, and it was finished by someone else. Now, if you really are the author of that story, you just change the character. Just change it. So for me, that is indicative that he was connected to sources before he wrote some of this down, although he's incredibly vague about it.
Hmm. And I think, I mean, one of the things that I think about this is that there is also a kind of confluence that doesn't necessarily have to be origin. So one of the things that Christians do, and I mean not just Christians, but when most people do, is that if they have a tradition, for example, about the importance of the cup that Christ used at the Last Supper, and also there's a tradition of the cup into which the blood of Christ is gathered. You know, and you see that in early medieval images. You see the angel that holds a cup underneath the blood that on the cross, when Christ is on the cross, you see the blood coming out, and you see an angel that's holding the cup and that is receiving the blood. So you have these traditions that are there, and then you also have other images that come from pagan sources, like, you know, like horn of plenty type cups,
Wow.
cups that even if you think of the fairy tale of the little pot, you know, that makes the porridge, you know, that kind of stuff. So you have all of these images that are floating around in the story space, and it wouldn't be surprising that even people that tell the stories and seeing the relationships, you know, those will start to kind of glum together, and that even though there isn't a direct origin, that they
Wow.
end up accumulating these legends into the story.
Beautifully put. And I think both of us would agree with Augustine. All truth is God's truth.
Mm.
And so, you know, stories all over the place are filled with images, with information, insight, marvels, and wisdom. Mythology is a phantasmagoria of marvels. There's marvels everywhere. My life was studying marvels in a way through storytelling for 30 years. But there's a difference between marvels and healing. And there's something that goes on in Christianity that seems to be to do with profound healing. You know, I think of the church, not originally, you know, it's not an original thought to me. I do think of it as a kind of field hospital. I was
Mm.
saying to Paul Vanderklay recently, I said, I think Orthodoxy is about to become the field hospital of the West. You know, there'll just be people kind of coming, loafing over the fields, me being one of them, of course.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, but what I would take issue with, I suppose, is people are always very interested in what's the one true version of something. I've been
Mm.
thinking recently about the difference between the nativity in Matthew and the nativity in Luke, and my conclusion is maybe a story that important deserves more than one version. Maybe, you know, that's one of the glories of the gospel, is the strange tension that the four gospels hold us in.
Yeah, yeah.
And as I'm thinking now, again, I haven't thought any of this through, then the Grail, in a way, in its continual imaginative and holy spirited evolution, it's not meant to rest on the shoulders of one person or one telling. It's meant to be furtive in one way or another. Get this. This last weekend, I was lucky enough to be teaching with the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. And Rowan said he gave about an hour and a half where basically, and I hope he doesn't mind me phrasing it like this, he presented Jesus predominantly as a trickster figure. It was pretty interesting. And he said the first thing you need to know about Christ is how fundamentally unprofessional he is. And he says, just avoid professionals. And I was like, okay, coming from the ex-head of the Church of England, that was a very interesting thing. And then he went on and told Russian fairy tales. Can you imagine that? Rowan
Mhm.
Williams in a storyteller's cloak telling old Russian fairy tales as Christian allegories. Pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's
I
pretty
couldn't I
amazing.
couldn't have even imagined that 10 years ago, but he's that kind of fellow. So coming back anyway is what I'm trying to get at is the notion of the Grail as a movable feast. You will know that in terms of the origins of the Arthurian stories, there's a fairly convincing argument that some of the images come from the Caucasus. Uh, and so they would have moved through warriors that would have been part of the Roman army. that then would have settled in England, but would have been telling stories from the Caucasus, which have all sorts of mythologies of ladies of lakes and swords in stones. And that gets integrated into Celtic storytellers are a promiscuous bunch. We just wander around and we go, well, what have you got? You got a sword? Oh, that would be amazing in that story. And we go and we dream about it and we think about it and we fast on hills about it. And sooner or later, that sword may well arrive, So what I'm trying to encourage us is we have something with the Grail that is vital and alive and talking to us to this day. It's a verb, it's a movement.
I think that a lot of things in what you said. One is that, especially, well, first of all, in terms of Christ, like when the Gospels in the early centuries, there was a movement to consolidate the Gospels, right, and to create one gospel.
Yeah.
And so some of the early Christians, they were trying to move in that direction, and ultimately the church resisted that and left the four Gospels as is. And if you look at the image of Christ in glory with the four evangelists, with the four beasts, there is this sense that in fact we see Christ through these four representations, and that Christ remains, in some respects, remains hidden behind, and at the end of the Gospel of St. John, he says, if all the books, if everything you guys had done had written, not enough books in the world would be able to fill that. And so I think that there's something interesting about the Grail as well in that sense, is that the fact that what the Grail seems to represent as the quest, as the thing that is the thing you want the most, as the thing that will truly transform you, that will bring you beyond yourself. That it's true that can only be represented in multiple ways. It even though it has us, every one of us has that in them, but it won't appear the same to different people. And so it makes sense that there are these different tellings, and there is a aspect of the veil that has to remain veiled from us.
Yes, I always have a question. There's 3 questions with my students when we're getting near the Grail. I say, what do you love? What will it cost? How much are you prepared to pay? And that's usually rummaging around in a lot of the myths and stories that we care to remember. So I agree with you. For me, as soon as somebody says it absolutely is this, and this, a lot of my, as I said, that's all sunlight, no moonlight. There's no dream time in it. There's no dream time in it. And the thing that's so interesting about Wolfram, the first thing you need to know about the Grail stories is that they're written initially in French, not Latin. That's huge, because that's saying this is not just to prop up the church. These are stories to be told in the court of people like Eleanor of Aquitaine, to young men who may well become warriors, and try to figure out, is there a way of being in the world and defending in the church which is not just a brute on a horse, that is not, that actually brings forward the notion of noblesse oblige. But no doubt about it, Cretin is still very much a creature of court. But the character who we're going to explore through the telling of Parzival, this guy Wolfram von Eschenbach, is not a creature of court. He is a knight. He's a real knight. And you get that in his elaborate descriptions, which I have to rush through, of, armor, getting on and off horses. He just goes into outrageous gossipy detail because he's German. And you know what the Germans are like? They think, well, we'll take the French model, but we'll improve it. He's a minnesinger. He's a singer of love. He's a troubadour. He's around the same time as Cretin de Troyes, but like Cretin, he hides and obscures his sources. And he says, "Oh, I got this all from a French poet who got it all from a Middle Eastern astrologer who actually saw the story of the Grail in the night sky." So he opens it up like that. Personally, as someone that has sat almost weekly with Parzival for about 20 years, I think a lot of that is Wolfram's razzle dazzle. I don't think it's absolutely rooted. It's just his charisma as a storyteller. I don't need tremendous root system in it leading all the way back to India, but that doesn't mean that people won't write those books, because it's fun. It's great fun.
What what is the relationship? How do you understand the relationship? Because you could have, let's say, the story of the Grail in a more religious sense, right? You could have this idea of the legend, of the cup that Christ used at the Last Supper, that was maybe used to gather his blood at the cross, and that became a kind of a vessel of immortality, or however you want to think about it. So you could have this mythological. You could have had this mythological story, be told and retold. But how does it connect to the chivalrous aspect, do you think? Like the relationship between the knight and the lady. You see it in Chrétien de Troyes that it's there right at the outset. It's very important, this ambiguous relationship that the knights have with their lady. They have to give to their lady, but not too much. Like, they have to go on adventure, but they also have to care for their lady. Like, what does that have to do with the Grail? How do you connect these things together?
You get it. I mean, one word would be a certain kind of sensitivity. But let's go back to where that notion of what they call the far distant lady comes from. And irony of ironies, which it's delightful to me at the moment, especially in England. Everybody is so terrified of Islam, as if nothing good ever came out of it. It's all, it's all become a kind of mono thing at the moment. Islam, Islam, Islam. But of course, what you get in Moorish Spain, back in the era that these stories come from, is Islamic diplomats who would come over the Pyrenees and they would talk in the French courts. And you couldn't be a Muslim diplomat if you weren't a trained poet. That's pretty cool. And they turned up, and they would have ecstatic Persian poetry at their disposal that praised the feminine as a vehicle for encounter with divine ground. In other words, you could have a religious experience through a romantic encounter, and not promiscuity. It's not just eros, it's amor. So ironically, these courts of love were witnessing this, what you could call appreciative consciousness, coming across the Pyrenees in the shape of these Muslim diplomats. And they said, this is the missing bit in the tenderizing of our warriors and storytellers. So in other words, if we're going to start looking at something like the Grail, first of all, the Grail and its relationship to the feminine, its relationship to the land, its relationship to people in distress, we need to build a kind of body, an appreciative body of thought around it. And so there's a lovely phrase in the early troubadour tradition where they say, we had the bread, now we have the knife. In other words, the French poets, pre this Islamic influence, they understood sex, but they didn't understand amour. They didn't understand romance. We had the bread, now we have the knife. In other words, we're no longer tearing the bread with our hands. We're no longer raping women in fields when we go past them on our horse. We're sitting down, getting our lute out, and singing them a poem. So things start to change. I'll just give you an example. This is the very first, I can do this out of my head. This is William of Poitiers, I think. He says this. This is the first troubadour poem. In the sweetness of spring, words turn green, and the birds sing on, each in their own particular Latin. And I think about this sweet war that we brought to an end, when you gave me your faithful valley and your ring. I want my God to let me live long enough to have my hand under your cloak again. Boom. I want my God to let me live long enough to have my hand under your cloak again. So you get the divine world and the romantic, and everything is happening at the same time. But what we know is at the 12th and 13th century, there was a real need for, the Crusades had been going on. There was a need for young men that were not going to be monastics, but in some way had to feel connected to deep religious vocation. We meet people without quests in their life. We meet people that have no grail, and we recognize them because they are lost. They're lost in the wasteland. I see it all the time. I see the deficit of these stories around me a lot.
Hmm. There is. It seems there's also. I mean, because you were talking about this Moorish, these
Yeah.
Spanish poems that were coming. I wonder if you think there's also a relationship between Bernard of Clairvaux, and his kind of high devotion to the Virgin.
Oh,
He
absolutely.
yeah,
That's where
and the
that
Templars themselves, like because of Bernard, because he wrote their rule, there was a very, very strong devotion to the Holy Virgin in the early kind of crusading nights.
Yes, and that in the end is where that ends up in the troubadour tradition. Because first of all, it's a very volatile thing to do. That troubadour tradition believed that romantic love could only exist in adultery. It couldn't
Hmm.
happen in a marriage because marriages were things of convention. If you think of the word amor, Amor, if you turn it round, Roma, that is societal obligation. And the intoxications of love, which is writ large, for example, in the story of Tristan and Isolde, which they all loved, that means a degree of scandal. That means, passion overriding protocol. And that caused pandemonium because every time you tried to live out a troubadour poem, you were going to get unstuck by the head of the household.
That's right.
So what happens is they take that glorious re-emerging of care for the feminine, shall we say, poetical appreciation of the feminine, and they begin to focus it towards Mary for sure. Yeah.
Mm, mm. And I mean, what is your insight about that? Because I mean, a lot of people later will make a relationship between the Grail and the Virgin, as the container, as this kind of feminine container. Do you see that in the Grail tradition?
Yes, I do. I do. And I on a very it's funny, I have a career as an academic and I have a PhD, but the older I get, the more I try and shake it off me. You know,
Yeah.
for whatever year, I just try and sit there and allow whatever tiny imagination God has given me. I just try and let it be free range these days. So a thought that I do have is that I often think of the Grail as Mary's womb. I think, well, the most important thing is Christ, and that little 14-year-old girl, or however old she was, she's the Grail carrier for me because it's Christ,
Yeah.
So I see that. The church, as you know, has a slightly ambivalent relationship to the Grail stories for some time, because on the one hand, they are aware of their importance. They know it's part of the formation of the warrior caste, and chivalry is pointing towards Christian experience. But as we've said, it's not something that is hidden under people that can speak Latin. It's being spoken in French, or it's being spoken in German. There is a sense that people that are not clerical can have a very powerful encounter with vocation. And ultimately, you said it a few minutes ago, service. Who does the Grail serve? If you're not in service to something bigger than yourself, then you're not on a quest that is big enough for you,
Hmm.
you know?
I was marked because we just finished the Dante's Paradiso,
Wow.
and so we just finished that class, and I had read it maybe 10 years ago last time, and so it was great to read it again, and I was really marked, by the way, at the end when Dante describes the great mystic rose, right, the one which is the gathering of all the saints together. It was difficult not to notice that the shape of that mystic rose was actually like a giant cup.
Mm,
The way that he describes it as this rose, but that goes up on the sides, and that the divine revelation is in the middle, and it's kind of like an amphitheater, but you
mm,
realize that it's like a cup, it's like a flower, but
yeah.
it's also like a cup, and the Virgin is of course the one who's the highest and is mentioned as being the highest in the image, and so I don't know. Does Dante have does Dante have a connection to the Grail story?
Almost certainly. I couldn't produce it out of my head at this moment, but you would think it must have been there somewhere. Okay, so let's think about the Grail in terms of the relationship between desire and longing.
Hmm.
Because in a way, certainly in the story of Parzival, he can desire a second crack at the Grail. I don't want to be too much of a plot spoiler, but he has an encounter earlier on in his life. He's not quite ready for that moment, and the real digging for Parzival will be this one question: how do you find, by an act of will, something you once encountered as an act of grace? Is that even possible? But all the way through Parzival is the story of, it begins with the desire of a young man, and then as an older man that moves into spiritual longing. And spiritual longing is absolutely not the same thing. My desire is to do with books, as you can see around me, and my desire these days could be met fairly frequently and immediately. However, longing, and we learn this in the Irish tradition, they always say that you will experience something back from longing, but it'll rarely come in the shape that you are expecting. It comes in some other way. It comes in some more refined way. God is not going to necessarily give you what you want. He's going to give you what you need. And the duress that Parzival is under takes us back to a very essential thing in all myths: no pressure, no diamond. No pressure, no diamond, until you are forced into certain crisis, certain kind of acuity of circumstance. You're not really going to be able to get past the inebriation of your passions and into something deeper. Uh, so it's a story that never lets us go, in a way. It's a story for somebody that's 90. It's a story for somebody that's 16, you know.
Do you think that, I mean, related to, do you think that in some ways failing to recognize the Grail, or failing to be able to grasp it, is part of the story, that it almost has to happen to the hero so that he can ultimately reach that true longing?
My question will be, halfway through Parzival, the question I'll ask everybody is, what question have you failed to ask? What question have you failed to ask? Give yourself a few days to think about that, because I can guarantee you somewhere there's been a great abdication. You will have had a moment of tremendous potential that then sailed away. And the wonderful thing that we learn from fairy tales is that often these opportunities will come round again. When you think, for example, in folk myths, oh, once upon a time there was three brothers, there were three sisters. One of the ways you can enjoy that is the first two times the invitation to the quest comes, you blow it, or you're too focused on having a career or whatever it is. But the third time it comes around, which could be when you're 65, it's a matter of life and death. And so the younger brother in you, the younger sister in you, is the one that's going to have the adventure. And so I like the fact that the door of mercy is still open, a crack. And going back to what you just said, in a way, it's crucial that Parzival doesn't know the question. There'd be no story. He's too young, in a way, to know the question. And it reminds me of a story that you and I really love, Gawain and the Green Knight. Whereas I always feel at the end, Gawain, for the rest of his life, when he reaches on the back of his neck, there's that scar tissue. Man, that's going to be better than any book award he ever wins, or any podcast, or anything. Because I remember saying this once: in your incompleteness is your authenticity. You don't have to stay there. You know, we're working on theosis, but in your incompleteness is your authenticity. Get to know yourself in that fashion. And then know that against all conceivable odds, God is still unutterably interested in you. That's my miracle. It's like, how can that fella even gaze in my direction, at this point? But somehow he does.
Yeah, your insight, I think, is because it is mysterious. It is mysterious when you look at some of these stories, that there is an aspect of failure, especially in Sir Gawain, because he ends where he feels like he hasn't succeeded, like he has a kind of shame that he carries. But all the other characters are telling him, "No, you did great. You're wonderful." And so that I think that my modern self that's used to watching, movies with heroes and used to watching, Sylvester Stallone finish with a, Uzi shooting down all the bad guys. There's something about it that is disturbing. This weakness that is so on the forefront of the story. But I think that what you've just said is giving me insight into that. Is that in some ways we as Christians, we don't believe that we're sufficient.
No,
That there is, yeah.
I I notice over now, almost 30 years of working with groups of people, you never bring a room together in solidarity when you just give them victory stories. Never.
Mm.
What is astonishing is when somebody stands up and says, for better or for worse, I'm struggling. And I'm struggling with this. Now, that doesn't mean that you are just behaving in a typical kind of, I often talk about the addiction to disclosure that we seem to have these days. I'm not talking about that, but it is your capacity to just stand up and be real and say, I am exhausted. And there's a lovely Irish expression. They often, the Shanachie, the storytellers, often begin a story with this note. They say, how can I be with you if I am not sad? And everybody just goes, oh. And there's just a place at the table for our sorrows and our incompleteness and our confusions, but we persist anyway. And so you don't get drowned in it, but you allow it a place at the table. And so, in the old Irish myths, they always have these fellows called so and so, say, Con of the 100 battles. Well, part of having 100 battles is not that you succeeded every time, but you made your failure sufficiently insightful and beautiful that it becomes something that you can give other people.
Hmm. So I want to shift a little bit away from the Grail. People can follow you on that
Great.
front when the course comes, and I want to talk a bit about the new book.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
written, what is it, 20? How many books? 20
No,
something
no,
books.
not 20. I would have written about 17, and then they're not all huge. They're not all huge.
Still, that's quite a bit. And so, what is it? What is it about this book? What is it that you're working on in Liturgies of the Wild?
I was thinking about this earlier on, and I was thinking, I was having a kind of, I was like Seraphin of Saroff meets J.R.R. Tolkien in a bar in Chicago, and they have an arm wrestle, and that's Liturgies of the Wild. In a way, it's somewhere, it's kind of the place where wild orthodoxy meets English mythopoetics, and it's a bit of an explosion. It's a book. It's a book about a very simple premise that lives behind all myths and stories. How do we become fully human? In the time of, as our friend Paul would say, in the time of the machine, how do you become an angel in that machine? That's a lot of what, in a way, someone wrote to me the other day very kindly about it, and they said, Paul gives us the diagnosis, you give us the remedy. Now, who knows? Who knows? I wouldn't be so inflated as to say that, but the book certainly is a counsel of resistance and delight in a very difficult time. And so, what the book is full of is stories, myths, and ideas that are both Christian and probably in wider traditions like fairy tales. But the premise all the way through is what do these stories have to say about envy? What do they have to say about passivity? What do they have to say about sex? What do they have to say about passion, and on and on and on. And so for me, as you can see by us talking, I'm somebody, a bit of a slippery salmon in my thought process, but this book is not like that. This book is surprisingly Anglo-Saxon in its discipline, in the sense that you can go to a particular chapter. Let me have a look now. Okay, yeah, there'd be a chapter on death, there'd be a chapter on guilt, there'd be a chapter on limit, which for me, limit is really interesting. That's part of the joy for me of orthodoxy. Is I think we live in a culture which is all about feasting and never about fasting. And I've been a loyal proponent of that indulgence my whole life. So orthodoxy is hugely useful for giving me something much bigger than me to bang up against. And finally, the book, the 15th chapter, is about our capacity to make praise, to be praise makers. If you'll know this in the old Celtic description of a saint, they said, well, if nothing else, you felt different after you'd been in the presence of a saint. The world felt freer, more creative, and there was more possibility about. Your imagination had largened at that moment. William Blake always says Jesus is the imagination. It's a great line from Blake. He says you can't be you can't be a Christian if you're not an artist. You can't be. And what he means by that is not that you have to get the watercolors out, but that your head is bigger. Your head is bigger. You see the lustrous strangeness of this world that he says is good, is very good, and it is a very good world. A lot about my work, a lot about the book, is about moving your vision from seeing things to beholding things. So it's in that romantic spirit, but it's also an urgent book. Took 3 years to write. The whole time I know you, I've been writing it. In fact, there's an abandoned chapter on Job, which you're in. I describe, there was a night that I remember very fondly when you and I were getting to know each other, and we sat there with smoking enormous cigars and drinking Guinness in Dublin. Do you remember? It was Saturday night, and it was kind of wild, like drunk. There was a lot of glasses were flying.
There was like bottles getting thrown, and it was wild. Yeah,
it was wild. And so you're in the version. So if anybody pre-orders, you get the hidden chapter on Job, which is not in the book, with Jonathan's in it. Come on, you got to back your brother here. You got to buy the book to read.
Yeah, that's right. You got to pre-order the book just to get the chapter with Jonathan in it.
There's also one of my wild drawings as well that you get as a free download. So that's what the book is about, Liturgies of the Wild. It would be very useful for Christians that are feeling their way into symbology, feeling their way into myth, and going, okay, is this a guy I trust that can walk me into this whilst my faith remains, ever deepening? It's a book, but on the other hand, it's a book also for many, many people that are only just now even beginning to glimpse the possibility of Christianity, saying, have a look at this. The most important thing is, in any real way, it's not selling anything. It's just not selling it. You just won't get that from me. I don't sell in that fashion. There'll be enthusiasm, but that's not the same thing as the cold-eyed seller. So I'm really proud of it. I tell you what, Jonathan, I've just been in a small dark room recording the audio for 3 days.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, if you can't stand by the book, you're going to find out in those 3 days. You're just going to hit a wall. You would have loved this. There was someone from Penguin who I never met, never saw them. They were just a disembodied voice in my headphones, listening from another part of the world for mistakes. So every now and then, I just suddenly hear croissant, Sami, parent, telescope. When you're reading 100 pages a day, that's not a natural thing for anybody to do, even a storyteller. So I'm really pleased with it. It's probably the only book in the world that has endorsements from Gabor Mate and Rod Dreher on the same background. So I'm pleased about that.
And are they? Let's say, is Penguin framing it as a Christian book, or
100%. Here's some amazing information for you. We've been talking for a few years now about a kind of Christian renaissance, but publishers may be interested in that, but the rubber has to hit the road with statistics. And this book, Liturgies of the Wild, is launching in the UK a wonderful new imprint of Penguin called Ebury Vine, and Ebury Vine is explicitly Christian, and Liturgies of the Wild is one of several books they're launching it with, and they have a whole bunch of statistics about the phenomenal increase in young people especially buying Bibles
Yeah.
joining, the whole it would have been talked about a lot on your podcast already. But yes, just to let you know, it is unadorned in its Christianity. But I'm pleased to say there wasn't one adjective. There's no adjective taken out. There's no clipping. There's no neatness. The only thing that they paid real attention to, they had a wonderful editor, but the thing she paid attention to was herself. She said, "I'm new to mythology. Walk me through it. Keep holding my hand from beginning to end." And I wouldn't be famous for that. So if you're new to this will be a bridge of a book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And in some ways is it the first book that you've written since your conversion? Or was there a book before? There was a book of the story of your conversion.
There are little things. I did a translation of the Bacchae,
Yeah.
uh, but I wrote that before the conversion. I wrote a little book called Stag Cult that was around that period of time, but it's been the big project. It's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
the thing that I've been laboring on, and I have I have Rod Dreher to thank actually for that, because Rod sort of outed me to the entire world at a very tentative point in my conversion experience. And one of the positive things, of which there have been many about that, was that his publisher at the time and his editor became interested in the story, which led to the book getting written. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And now it's been 3 years, we've had a lot of people kind of appearing, you could say, coming out of the mist, appearing. And so, what's your vision, and what do you see coming forward? Do you feel like because obviously there are people going back to church, there are people buying the Bibles, but do you sense that there is a deeper vision, that there are enough people, Christians, that are able to kind of see it as more than propositional, as a kind, almost like as a mythic vision?
Yeah. The most interesting Symbolic World episode I've seen for a while is the one with you and Deacon Seraphim, as we shall now, old Blue Eyes, as I like to call him, you and Blue Eyes, talking about American religion
Hmm.
and what happens when you focus emphatically on a born again experience, and that becomes the pivot for everything else. Because as we all know, anybody that's ever been a Christian, if you remained in that state the whole time, you'd be a nervous wreck. Even Hildegard von Bingen needed a day off, I'm telling you. you know so what do you do when it's not like that? What do you
Hmm.
do when you're in the territory of Jonathan Cross? And yeah, it's a great idea. You'll feel God most acutely when he's absent, or he feels to be absent. So, in other words, I appreciate the excitement and the spirit of the moment. To make a distinction between spirit and soul, spirit is very much the sense of possibility, but soul is the dip into something that has to be sustainable and long term. So I couldn't say quite what is going on in England. Protestant Christianity is in a very, very strange position. It doesn't really, they've sold the farm, really. They don't barely know what they are. Although I have lots of Protestant friends and some wonderful Anglican priests are very close to me. So on the one hand, you have something becoming compost and needing to be composted, and then the green shoots can come.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, you have this phenomenal uptake of interest in things like orthodoxy, which have never ever really showed their face. Not in my lifetime, not in any real way. We did have the wonderful, Metropolitan, Callistos Ware and Metropolitan Anthony, but by and large, this is a new energy, and it's different colors, visually, the power of the icons, etc. I've just been with our mutual pal, dear Heather Pollington. She's so great, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's outrageous, her whole family, that everyone's so adorable. I want to commend you, Jonathan, for the amazing people that you have around you. I was thinking about it the other day. Again, my second favorite Symbolic World episode, it's so genius, is Pirates and Monks.
Of course you would like that.
My My whole heart. And you said such a fantastic thing in it. You said pirates are agents of disruption, monastics are agents of continuity. But who is your amazing friend?
Andrew, you have never met
I
Andrew.
have
Oh,
met
you
Andrew on a number of occasions, but Andrew has the voice of a 100-year-old man.
That's
Where
right.
does that accent come from?
You know, it's actually his accent is because when he was young, he had a speech impediment.
Oh,
And what he did is he developed a way of speaking which was almost singing, which was rhythmic. And that is how he was able to get beyond his speech impediment and learn to speak normally, but that left in him this very peculiar accent. And what's wild about it is that he is the only person in the world that has that
yeah,
accent,
yeah.
and his children have that accent.
How glorious.
There's gonna be there'll be a Gould line of English that will develop downstream from him.
Well, if I'm not concentrating, I think he's English. I just think he's a Brit, because
Yeah.
it's like some I imagine he went to a very odd private school on the borders of Wales with only 5 students, and one guy called, Dr. Cornelius, who just taught by candlelight, and just gave him deep esoteric wisdom. But Andrew and Deacon Seraphim and the wider ensemble, it's just so amazing. It's so, isn't it? I mean, if we think for a minute about the notion of the machine, it's such a senseless act of beauty, Symbolic World, because you are doing this Aikido move where you're making something that is beautiful and useful and nourishing to thousands of people with the very mechanics that can seem so dreadful.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you, Martin. I feel gratitude every day when I think of
Yeah.
you, when I think of Paul, when I think of Andrew, when I think of Deacon Seraphim and Heather. In some ways, my entire life, I suffered in silence in the hopes that I could have people like that around me. And without doing it on purpose, almost it happened without my direct action. I feel like now I have this amazing band of friends that really want what's true and beautiful and good.
I always have that feeling from you that when we're together, you handle things really lightly, and I mean that in a good way. I don't see you as a sort of a Grendel or a, my precious, my precious. I don't see that. I see you just being open and sort of slightly amazed, because like me, we haven't come into this as children. You and I are not bounding around in our early 30s. We're like becoming old fellas. We're becoming old fellas, which is why storytelling is so important, because you can't be a decent storyteller till you're about 65 anyway. Which is good news, which is good news for all of us. But I just wanted to slip that in. How I want to slip in again this notion for anybody that's wondering, be an angel in the machine. Just find your way to keep turning the current towards grace and beauty, and these things are going to be very good for your health.
Yeah, that is so important because even myself, I can feel moments in myself when I feel jaded, when I feel cynical, and there's anger at the direction, some of the directions the world is in. But it's true that everything that's life-giving is there in the celebration, is there in finding those sparks, and these stories, the stories the Grail story, and the stories that in your book, there are little
Mm.
places where we can remember what it is that
Thank,
here we're here for.
thank you. I've just led a pilgrimage to Walsingham, which is a very Mary-oriented
Mm.
place, and I told Blind Tobit. So I'm now doing a big oral storytelling of Blind Tobit.
All right.
I've been telling Ruth and Naomi. I've been telling Joseph in the underworld. I've been telling Jacob and Esau, which is a mind blower. Wait till you see me with my teeth into Jacob and Esau, man. The hairy boy.
That's right.
Uh, and then I sort of get to Jacob's well, and then we've got the women in, the woman at the well. Anyway, it's just glorious. So I'm strongly suspecting that my next body of work, God willing, I have a long life, will be to just start at Genesis and proceed.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that would be so precious. Wouldn't that be amazing? I really hope that that's what you do next. That would
Thank
be
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Martin, thank you so much
Oh, it's a
for
pleasure, man.
everything you do, and I can't wait for the next moment that we're having another Guinness together.
Well, we will be, because I am going to be with you next month in London.
Yes.
And
That's
tell me
the truth.
about that, because I'm a chair. I'm your chair that evening. So
Okay.
you sit on me. No, I'm kidding. It's not that kind of chair. I'm just
Yeah.
kind of hosting the thing for Temenos. What are you doing? What are you up to in England?
Yeah, so I mean, I was going there for meetings, and then people at Temenos Academy. The Temenos Academy, for people who don't know, is King Charles, one of King Charles's foundations. It's a foundation. It's kind of like Neoplatonic Christianity, a desire to have a deeper kind of metaphysical a vision of Christianity, and so they reached out to me. I know you've spoken there there before, and what I want to do is I want to talk about microcosm and macrocosm, because we use it as a theory. People talk about it, but often it's said without being looked at and without people being able to see the examples and how they play out fractally in the person. And so hopefully I'll have a crowd that will be able to sustain a little more of a highbrow discussion on that question. And so yeah, so people should come. It's January 28th,
Yeah.
28th,
Let
I
me
think.
let's figure this out. Yeah.
Did it right.
You very rarely get me looking at computers
I
in
know.
this fashion,
Like,
but it is 27th, Tuesday the 27th.
it's the 20th. Yes. Okay. All right. So it's the 27th. Yes. Okay. So yeah. So it is. So it's January the 27th in London. We'll put a link also in the description if you want to join. And so there are a lot of great things you can participate in. Pre-order Martin's book,
Yes,
because
please.
we wanted to hit the bestseller list. And if you pre-order it, that's
Yeah.
how that happens.
Yeah, believe it or not, it could happen. And you fellas could, you could do that.
We
So
could do it.
it'd be an amazing thing. Yeah.
So pre-order the book. Sign up also for the Grail week, where we're all going to sit and have some whiskey. Sit with a whiskey.
Yeah. Every night I've got the cigar and the whiskey already. Good.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks for everything you do, Martin.
Bless you,
All right, bye,
everybody.
everyone.